Hey everybody, welcome back to the Let's Talk Q&A show. I am your host, John. This is the weekly show where we answer all of your burning questions. And right off the top, we're going to talk about last week's show where I asked you guys, how would you feel if every single week we picked a question of the week? This was suggested by Frank's ex-wife, and I thought it was a pretty good idea, but I left the option out to you guys to see what you guys thought about it. And the poll was 63% of you guys thought, hey, why don't you do it every single week, pick a question of the week, and that winner gets a digital code. And I had to think up some little rules for this just because I don't want anyone to feel bad. That's my biggest thing, is I don't want anyone to feel bad. If you send me in a question, I'm going to answer that question, and I appreciate every single question. This is just for fun. We'll make a rule that you can only win once a month, so like the same person isn't winning every single week. Maybe we'll even do a poll where I pick my top 3 favorite answers, and then you guys can pick from there to make it even fair. And, we'll start this all next week. I'll ask that second part in another poll this week, and then, we'll work out the kinks this week. This week itself is just going to be a regular old-fashioned Q&A show. So let's just dive right back into that and start it off with this week's first question. And this question came in a couple weeks ago from Jose, and I completely forgot to answer it. He reached out to me and said, do you remember this question, John? And sure enough, I didn't. And he asked me, what are the top 5 best revenge films? And I made a quick list for this. And number 5, I have Unforgiven. Now, the revenge doesn't take place until the final scene of the movie, but man, that is one of the greatest scenes in film history. Clint Eastwood is going to get his revenge for everything that they have done to him. They broke the man down again, and he was already a broken down man, but you pushed him into the ground, and Little Bill just went a little bit too far, and now that's it. You're going to get the old William Money out, and this William Money is going to kill you. I know that has one of my favorite lines in the film from Gene Hackman when he's about to die. But I was building a house. I mean, Little Bill had that coming. At number 4, I got Old Boy, the original Old Boy, Park Chan-wook's Old Boy, not Spike Lee's Old Boy. And I love Spike Lee, but that United States remake, oh my god, it's just not that good of a movie. Now, it does have some of the bones of the original Old Boy in there, but the original Old Boy, it's shot perfectly. It'll get under your skin. Like the first time, I'm sure a lot of people experienced this, the first time you saw that movie, you did not expect the movie to end that way. You're asking a lot of questions throughout the film. It's just an incredibly well done movie. If you haven't seen Old Boy, this is a high recommendation for that. And at number 3, I have John Wick. And of course I have John Wick. I mean, they killed his dog, they stole his car, they beat the shit out of him, and they didn't realize who they were messing around with. They were messing around with Baba Yaga, the boogeyman. And this is the guy you sent in to kill the boogeyman. And I just love this aspect. One of my favorite movie cliches, one of my favorite movie tropes is a character we don't realize is a badass, but everybody around him knows how much of a badass he is. Like, this is the guy. This is a monster. You fucked with the wrong guy, and now you're going to pay. And John Wick and the entire franchise piggybacked off of this one scene where they killed his dog in the beginning of the movie. And I'm so glad they did, because we wouldn't have gotten 4 great films like this. The only thing is, I just wish that they didn't hurt the dog. You could have done something else, like knock him out, steal the car, but you didn't have to hurt the cute beagle. That beagle was adorable. At number 2, now you guys might not say this is necessarily a revenge film, but in The Godfather Part 2, a big aspect is the Robert De Niro character, the young Vito Corleone. We see his entire life from the time we see him as a 9-year-old child in Corleone, Italy. They kill his entire family. They kill his father, his brother, his mother. He gets out of there, and he goes to America to start a new life. But he didn't forget about this. He didn't forget about what the Don over there did to his entire family. And he waits. He waits until he's got his footing in America, and he's a very popular olive oil salesman, and of course he's the Don over there in the United States. He's going to come to Corleone, Italy, and he's going to seek his revenge. Now, if you don't count that as a great revenge film, because again, it's only one part of The Godfather Part 2, I understand that. And if that's the case, then I'll go with Charles Bronson in Death Wish. Death Wish is a fantastic revenge film, and it started a great franchise as well. But number 1, I have to go with a Quentin Tarantino movie. Some people might go with Inglourious Basterds, but for me, I'm going to go with the entire bloody saga of Kill Bill Volume 1 and Volume 2. They fucked with the wrong person. They fucked with Uma Thurman. They screwed with the bride, and look what happens. She comes after you. She kills the entire crazy 88. There's no one who can stop her. Eventually, she's going to get to Bill and everybody else who screwed her over, and she's going to seek her revenge. And the entire time you're watching the movie, you're hoping that she gets her revenge because, they went a little bit too far. You should have made sure she was dead. That's a rookie mistake on their part. These are supposed to be some of the world's greatest assassins, and unfortunately, you failed, and now you have to meet your maker. So that was a great question, Jose. I really appreciate that. Sorry it took me so long to answer it. And the next question's from Kevin Kruger, and he said, how would you rank the Stephen King movies in your Blu-ray collection? I happen to have them all right here. And just because these are Blu-rays and 4K Blu-rays and the quality of the disc is kind of all over the place, I'm going to rank them based on the quality of film. So I'll talk about some of the 4K Blu-rays in there if I think they're nice, but for the most part, we're just going to rank the films in here. We'll start at the bottom. It Chapter 2. It Chapter 1 is a fantastic film. We'll talk about that in a little while, but they just couldn't stick the landing with It Chapter 2, which is a common problem. The 1990 It miniseries, a lot of people complain about the second half of that film, me included. Still think it's really good, and I still think It Chapter 2 is pretty good. It's just that when you're It Chapter 1 and you gotta go to It Chapter 2, a lot of us had hoped that they would figure out the problems with It Chapter 1, and they just couldn't. And I know it's gonna seem pretty low to some people, because I know a lot of people consider this their favorite Brian De Palma movie. Some of them consider it their favorite horror movie of the 1970s, and this is, I believe, the first film even based on a Stephen King novel, and that's Carrie. I mean, this is the one that, saved Stephen King's life, if I'm correct, and made him a professional writer that people came to respect and made Stephen King one of the greatest writers of all time. He wrote Carrie, but the film Carrie, despite it being directed by Brian De Palma, and I love Brian De Palma, Blowout is a masterpiece. John Travolta pops up in this, and so does Nancy Allen, who do show up again in Blowout. Just don't love Carrie that much. That's why I haven't upgraded to the 4K. I have this one a little low because I don't necessarily count it 100% because it's really George A. Romero and Stephen King's kind of baby. Stephen King even pops up in a role in it, and that's Creepshow. But Creepshow, this 4K Blu-ray is amazing. Creepshow is one of the best anthology horror films of all time. Definitely check it out. This has a 4K Blu-ray and a remake. I just haven't grabbed them on 4K Blu-ray or the remake on 4K Blu-ray, despite the fact that I think the remake is actually pretty good. But we're going to go with Pet Sematary. The original Pet Sematary from the 1980s is fantastic. And this one, a lot of people probably don't even realize that Stephen King wrote this, but Misery won Kathy Bates an Academy Awards. Rightfully so. She's fucking petrifying in this movie. The hobbling scene with her and James Caan is one of the scariest scenes in film history, just because when you see that leg break, yeah, it'll get under your skin. I don't mind watching all this blood and gore and all this gross out stuff, but when a leg breaks like that, when you see it in the NFL, it always gets under your skin, and it sure gets under your skin here. I know people are going to be like, how do you put this movie above Misery, which a lot of people consider a masterpiece by Rob Reiner? Well, this movie's just a lot of fun, needful things, and if anyone knows anything about me, and you've probably noticed this if you've been watching the channel for any amount of time, I love over-the-top performances, and when an actor is having an absolute blast, and clearly Max von Sydow is having an absolute blast in this film as the devil. He just rolls into town, opens the store, and, basically is granting everyone the wishes that they would want to have granted for them. He's giving them what they need, their needful things. Of course, he's the devil, so that means there's a devil's twist on it, and it leads to a crazy third act. And I mean, my God, you have to see Needful Things if you've never seen it. A lot of people would say, it's not really a good movie. I have a blast with it. And then the follow-up to The Shining, Dr. Sleep, directed by Mike Flanagan. Stanley Kubrick directed the original Shining, so to have the sequel directed by Mike Flanagan, who I think is one of our great modern horror directors, and, obviously TV show creators. Look at all the stuff he's done on Netflix, and I believe he's going to be taking all that work over to Amazon Prime Video, so maybe there'll be some physical releases, because we've needed The Haunting of Hill House on 4K Blu-ray for way too long. But anyway, this movie is fantastic. We get to see the older Danny Torrance, played by the great Ewan McGregor, perfectly cast in this movie, and what he's doing as an adult. And the movie itself had no business being this good, and Rose the Hat is a great villain. I didn't even realize he directed a couple Stephen King movies, but here, Stand By Me, one of the best films of the 1980s, narrated by Richard Dreyfuss, who swears he doesn't remember making this movie. I don't believe you, Richard Dreyfuss. I think you're just trying to cause a scene, and I don't know why, but either way, Stand By Me is a great movie. Next up, we have the 1990 It miniseries. I saw this for the first time when I was a kid in about 1998. I was 6 years old, my God. Watched it on ABC Family. No idea why this was on ABC Family. Can't explain it. I mean, I guess, it is made for TV, so it's not that gory, but, any kid could stumble upon this. And this actually really got under my skin when I was a kid. When you watch it back, you're like, some of that stuff is cheesy, but I still really love this miniseries, and it does give me a lot of nostalgia. And I didn't even mention Tim Curry, but Tim Curry as Pennywise the Clown. That's great. Beep, beep. The Running Man! People might not realize that this is based on a Stephen King novel as well. You guys know how much maybe it wasn't a novel. It might have been a novella. Don't quote me on that. I'm not too sure what exactly it's based on. But it is based on a Stephen King piece. And this is The Running Man, which has one of my favorite 4K steelbooks that's ever been released. And also, I think this is one of the more underrated films of the 1980s. And a very underrated Arnold Schwarzenegger film. When we talk Schwarzenegger, The Running Man doesn't usually come up. And that's really a shame, because it's a fantastic film. And it's a lot like The Hunger Games. So if you like The Hunger Games, maybe with a nice 1980s slice of cheese on top and throw in big jacked Arnold Schwarzenegger banging out one-liners, including I'll Be Back, check out The Running Man. This one's definitely based on a novella, and this is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, John Cusack movie. Not a big John Cusack fan, but I am a big Samuel Jackson fan. We're talking about 1408, about a haunted hotel room at the Dolphin Hotel. I love this. I love the aspect of keeping this all in one room and you not being able to escape. I like the effects in this movie. It's just really good. Some people might consider this a little low on my list as well, but this movie I used to like a lot more when I was younger, but after I saw plenty of more films, I was like, this one, it's good, but it's not as good as I remembered it being, and that is The Shawshank Redemption. Yes, it is one of the best films of the 1990s. It was nominated for Best Picture in 1994. It is a great film, one of the best prison movies you'll ever see, has so many classic lines. I love this movie. I just don't love it as much as I used to love it. Might have got played out. This is one of those movies that they used to play on TV all the time. You probably came to it like halfway through. And here it is. It Chapter 1. The first one. This one was just, when it first came out, it was like really restarted. The Stephen King movies coming out. Like Netflix had a bunch of them come out. After this, everybody was putting out their own Stephen King films based on his novels and his novellas and everything like that. Because this movie just made so much money and it was good. That was the part that a lot of people forgot about when they started going back to the well with Stephen King films. You have to make them good. It's a lot easier to make the first part of the book than it is to make the second part. And this one taking place in the 1980s, which is a nice choice. Loved all those decisions. Thought it was great. All the choices of music in there coming out around the time of Stranger Things. So it was it was really topical for the time, but it's still a great film. I was surprised to have this as high on my list as I do, but Christine is a masterpiece. It is absolutely one of John Carpenter's best films. It might be in his top 2 scores of all time. I always underestimate how good this score is, but it really moves the full film along. Such a weird movie. A movie like this shouldn't be that good. It's about a killer car, but it is that good. And now we're going to be talking about the films that made the podium. The one that got the bronze medal is The Mist. And I didn't expect this. This is the same director, Frank Darabont, who actually directed The Shawshank Redemption, and you didn't see it on this list, but The Green Mile as well. He knows how to adapt Stephen King films, and he did a great job here with The Mist. And this 4K Blu-ray is fantastic. You can watch this in black and white or color. Haven't watched this year, but this movie is so well done. At number 2, this is going to surprise some people, and this doesn't feel like your typical David Cronenberg film. It's not a body horror film. It's a pretty straightforward horror drama starring Christopher Walken, and that's The Dead Zone. And this is also one of the most underrated 4K Blu-rays that I've ever seen. I wanted to tell people about this when it came out last year. Actually, did it come out in 2023? At the end of 2023, I was stunned at how much of an upgrade this 4K Blu-ray was. So if you don't have The Dead Zone, you've never seen The Dead Zone, grab this 4K Blu-ray. I really think you'll appreciate it. The film itself is amazing. And then at number 1, The Shining. How could it not be The Shining? And I'm sorry, because it's like Stephen King. We're talking about Stephen King, and Stephen King himself doesn't like Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. He prefers the 1997 or 1998 miniseries that came out, which he was more involved with. This is more of a Stanley Kubrick adapting Stephen King's novel into his vision. Like, it's going through the Stanley Kubrick filter, and that's fine. And I love it, obviously. You get a great Jack Nicholson performance in there as Jack Torrance, one of the most famous characters in film history. We're still talking about this movie to this day. It's January at the time of this recording, so that's winter time. Every single winter, you have to watch The Shining at some point. It's a necessity at that point. But that was a great question, Kevin. Thank you so much. I really did appreciate that. And the next question is from Will, and this is a great question. He said, which movies do you think will never get a 4K Blu-ray release? And it's funny because he also brought up the reason why he asked this question is because Gone with the Wind, the 1939 Best Picture winner. I believe it's still the most financially successful film of all time, adjusted for inflation. A lot of people probably think of Wizard of Oz and thought that won the 1939 Best Picture. No, it was Gone with the Wind, and Gone with the Wind does not have a 4K Blu-ray release. Now, I've seen this re-released in theaters over the last 10 years at some point, but it doesn't have a 4K Blu-ray release, and I'm not too sure why that is. Most movies that are a Best Picture winner do have 4K Blu-ray releases, and they should. Every Best Picture should at least have a 4K Blu-ray release. Not too sure what is holding up Gone with the Wind, but there's a chance we may never get Gone with the Wind on 4K Blu-ray, which would be a shame. I actually have never seen that. That's like my one big blank spot is Gone with the Wind. I'm kind of saving it for a 4K Blu-ray release, or I guess until a big re-release in theaters, because that's my one big blank spot as far as the greatest films of all time. Still somehow have let Gone with the Wind slip by me, and at this point, I can't just watch it on standard Blu-ray. I have to wait. So that is one that might not ever come to 4K Blu-ray, which blows my mind how some of these classic films are just stuck and never coming. Like Ben-Hur, there's a chance that Ben-Hur might not ever come to 4K Blu-ray, and that makes absolutely no sense. Should have already come to 4K Blu-ray. There's all these rumors that Near Dark is going to be coming to 4K Blu-ray at some point. I don't know what's holding that up. The Blu-ray has been out of print forever as well, if it even had a Blu-ray, but you can't even buy that movie. You can't even stream that movie. Catherine Bigelow, like, we always hear these rumors that it's going to be coming to 4K Blu-ray, but we never really get any solid rumors about it, so there's a chance that that never comes to 4K Blu-ray as well, which is absolutely criminal because Near Dark is a fantastic movie. I could even include it on my best vampire movies list because I haven't seen it in so long, and it kills me because I want to watch Near Dark again. And now I'm actually really starting to get worried that we might not ever get any of the big Paul Thomas Anderson movies on 4K Blu-ray. I'm actually gonna have a review for Punch Drunk Love coming out on 4K Blu-ray pretty soon from the Columbia Classics collection. But how do we not have Boogie Nights and Magnolia yet? Like, I could see Boogie Nights coming, but there's a good chance that Magnolia, just like when it came out, you know how Tom Cruise didn't get nominated for an Academy Award when he really deserved it. I could see a world where we never get Magnolia on 4K Blu-ray, which would absolutely kill me because that deserves a 4K Blu-ray release just as much as Boogie Nights. Boogie Nights and There Will Be Blood, like, I feel like they will eventually come. They're just too popular, whereas Magnolia, like, most people just skip over Magnolia and don't even think about it. But then again, we're getting Hard 8 on 4K Blu-ray, so I'm not entirely sure what the deal is, but I could see a world where we never get Magnolia on 4K Blu-ray, Gone with the Wind on 4K Blu-ray, which absolutely kills me. So there are plenty of films that haven't come to 4K Blu-ray yet, but Magnolia, Gone with the Wind, I could see those never coming to 4K Blu-ray just because, and Near Dark, just because I don't know exactly what is the holdup at this point already. They should have come to 4K Blu-ray, so I assume there's some sort of, like, rights issues. That's always usually the big thing. Look at all the movies held hostage by 20th Century Fox, like Fight Club. Yeah, those movies just haven't come to 4K Blu-ray because, you know, Fox is lazy and they don't want to either lease the rights out or do the work themselves. It's not Fox, I'm sorry. It's Disney. Disney's lazy. Disney owns Fox, owns those Fox films at this point, and they're the ones being lazy. It's just so disappointing for, you know, the fans like us. So that was a great question as well, Will. Thank you so much, buddy. I really appreciate that. And the next question is from Sprazy110. This is a quick one, and he said, what's your favorite soda? My favorite soda is Baja Blast. I actually don't drink soda anymore. I gained weight really easy, so one thing I cut out of my life like 10 years ago was soda, but every once in a while, my favorite restaurant being Taco Bell, and a Baja Blast tastes better there than if you get it from the store. I have to get an ice cold Baja Blast. I used to always enjoy a nice ice cold Coca-Cola as well. Still very refreshing. When I go to the movies every once in a while, I might get like a Coke Zero, but that's just to wash down the popcorn. For the most part, to get my carbonated fill, I actually just get canned seltzer, lemon lime seltzer. It kind of tastes like lemon lime soda, like Sprite or what used to be Sierra Mist, but you know, it's a little bit more healthy. There's no calories or sugar or anything in there. I do still love soda, but I know that soda's a problem for me. But every once in a while, I'll get a Baja Blast or a Coke Zero at the movies, and you know, quench my thirst. So that was a great question, Sprazy110. I appreciate that as well, buddy. And Sprazy110's other question is my favorite cereal, and actually I happen to be a huge cereal lover. I had to stop eating that. Very similar to soda, just too much sugar and just very unhealthy, so of course I had to cut down on cereal as well. But when I do get to eat cereal, when I treat myself, I'm always going to go for the taste that you can see, Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And of course I'm a big Count Chocula fan. I can remember the days when Count Chocula used to be sold year round and not just around spooky season. I still wish we did, even though I couldn't buy it all year because again, I'll probably die of diabetes. So of course we have to pick and choose when we get cereal nowadays, even though I love cereal, and if I could, I would eat cereal every single day of my life. I used to eat cereal for dinner a lot when I was a kid, and I never complained about that. Big fan of Brenner. Anytime you can have breakfast for dinner, I'm there for it. We actually just had French toast, or we were just going to have French toast last night for dinner. Had to postpone that to Sunday, but I was really looking forward to having French toast last night for dinner. So, big breakfast guy for dinner, and of course, cereal is just one of the greatest foods ever invented. It is a sugary mess, but I don't care. Sugar is great. It's just not good for us. But that was a great question as well, Sprazy. Thank you so much, buddy. And the next question is from Kylie Tinkle, and she said, please answer for next week's Q&A. In your opinion, who is the king of horror? Well, Stephen King's the king of horror. The guy's written so many books in the horror genre. He's written so many novellas that involve horror, and then of course all the movies that were adapted into film, and then of course all the movies that were adapted from his books based on the horror genre. He is the king of horror. But if you were talking about the horror director, I think at one point I said that Wes Craven was the king of horror. And I go back and forth whether it's him or John Carpenter, because Wes Craven had a hit in the 1970s in The Last House on the Left, a hit in the 80s in A Nightmare on Elm Street, and then a hit in the 90s in Scream. So he basically saved the slasher genre twice, because in 1984 it was dying, and then in 1996 it was pretty much dead, and he brought them back to life. So, of course, you can say that it was him, but then I actually say it's definitely John Carpenter. Not only did he direct 1978's Halloween, but he also directed Christine, The Thing, Prince of Darkness, In the Mouth of Madness. His last few movies were horror movies as well, in the Ward, Vampires, and Ghosts of Mars. Yeah, he did made some other films that aren't necessarily horror, but he always made genre films like Assault on Precinct 13 or They Live, which have like elements of horror in there. So I'd say that John Carpenter, he's the king of horror in my opinion. That's a great question, Kylie. I really do appreciate that. And the next question is from Deranged Psychopath, and it kind of ties into what we were just talking about. He said, what is your opinion of Tobe Hooper as a filmmaker? And we've talked about Tobe Hooper a lot here on the channel. Tobe Hooper actually technically directed one of my favorite horror films of all time in Poltergeist. But as you guys have heard me talk about, I think Poltergeist is at least co-directed by Steven Spielberg. I mean, that's his story. He was on set every single day. He's the producer. He helped cast the film. He was making that movie at the same time they were making E.T. They were basically filmed at the exact same time. So, of course, it's really a co-production between Tobe Hooper and Steven Spielberg. But I still love Tobe Hooper. The guy also directed one of the most famous horror movies of all time. And I don't remember what list it was. Was it Variety or Rolling Stone? Last year said that they thought the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was the greatest horror film of all time. Now, I disagree. But I can also see why you would say that and why people might say that that's the greatest horror film of all time. If you say that's the greatest horror film of all time, I understand. Even if I do disagree, I get it. It is one of those films that's still a huge influence today. Look at Rob Zombie. Rob Zombie clearly loved the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Me being the 80s fan that I am, I think the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, which is also directed by Tobe Hooper, is the better of those films. I get it. That's basically a satire what they were doing with the first film, but still, I like that one more. He also directed Life Force, and I also really like Funhouse from the 1980s. So Tobe Hooper, he's a great director in himself. I would say he's like on that B tier of horror directors. He doesn't get close to like the John Carpenters or the Wes Cravens, but he's right there. He obviously loves the horror genre, and of course, you have classics like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist under your belt. You're going to be talked about a lot. So that's a great question, Deranged Psychopath. I appreciate that one as well. And the next question's from our channel director, Mr. Smelly Potato, and he said, what is your favorite scene set to music in a movie? And I actually happen to love needle drops in film. That's why two of my favorite directors of all time are Martin Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino. The two of them just know how to use music in their films. A lot of music that I never would have found came from them. And I think the best example of using music in your movies and the best needle drop of all time comes in the movie Goodfellas. The song Then He Kissed Me. That's playing during that... huge wonder that they do. They start in the outside of the restaurant, they go underneath through the kitchen until they end up at the front of the Coco Cabana, and that's when Karen asks him at the end of the scene, what is it that you do? Oh, I'm in construction. And she's like, you don't seem like you're in construction. I'm a union delegate. Just love that scene, just like blowing her off. Like, I don't ask these questions after he's like giving out 20s to everybody who walks by. What are you two? Every time I come in here, you two, you guys ever working? I love that scene. And then he kissed me is great. Goodfellas is filled with all of these great music moments in there when they're beating the shit out of what's his name, Billy Bats. They're kicking the shit out of him. Whatever song they're playing then is also fantastic. Layla at the end, the one part of the song where Jimmy got so paranoid he's killing everyone off. We got that playing in there. So Goodfellas, I think, was the best use of music in general in film, but if I had to pick one scene in general, I'm just going to go with the scene And Then He Kissed Me. I think that scene is perfect. It's one of the greatest scenes in film history. So many movies have tried to copy that one, or you might say, oh, Touch of Evil has the best one of all time, or maybe even Boogie Nights, because that has two oneers. But Boogie Nights took so much from Goodfellas. You got to give it to Goodfellas. So that was a great question as well, Mr. Smelly Potato. Thanks so much, buddy. And the next question is from the Dark Knight. He said, what is your favorite location in your home to watch movies? So I usually either watch movies in here in the smaller TV in my office if I'm ever watching a movie with subtitles. But if I'm not watching a movie with subtitles, I always go out to the living room and I watch it on my main TV, which is an LG C2, and I have my Panasonic 820 in there. That's always my main go-to place. If I can watch a movie in my living room, that's where I'll watch it. That's where my surround sound is. Sometimes I'll watch a movie in the bedroom, but for the most part, I won't, just because my TV in there is not as good. Like, when you have an OLED, you kind of get dragged to your OLEDs because everything else, you just, like, I like my Sony 950H. I used to think that Sony TV had great color on it, and it still does have great color. But having the backlight really does kind of ruin it a little bit for me. It's like, once you go OLED, you can't go back. Even though Samsung does have the QLEDs, obviously Sony now has their own OLEDs themselves that they use. So I always recommend an OLED or a QLED TV. I have to watch those movies on my OLED. I can't go back. So of course I'm either going to be in here watching it on the LG C1, or I'm going to be in my living room watching it on the LG C2. So that was a great question, buddy. Appreciate that as well. And the next question is from Haunted Pillowcase, and he said, for next week, what is your opinion on the movie MacGruber? Well, I actually happen to have MacGruber on Blu-ray right here, and I absolutely love MacGruber. I think MacGruber is the most underrated comedy of the last 20-something years. It is absolutely fantastic. The running jokes through that movie are great. It's based on a Saturday Night Live skit that starred Will Forte, Kristen Wiig. It was basically a spoof of MacGyver. And you had like 30 seconds MacGruber, a real short skit, basically how he just distracts himself, goes on and on. Will Forte is a little bit of an idiot as far as MacGruber goes. And then when you get into the movie, you're like, what is this movie going to be? And it's basically a satire and spoof of the 1980s action comedies. And it's great. It's one of the best buddy comedy movies you'll ever see. It's very rare you even see Ryan Felipe play a character like this. And it's just absolutely hysterical.
Okay, I think our definitions of low profile might be a little different.
You think?
Will Forte was born to play MacGruber, in my opinion. He's always really good, and I always appreciate seeing him pop up, but playing this overly confident guy who has no reason to be this confident is just, it's hysterical. The celery trick is great. You bring in all those wrestlers from that era, and it's funny. This movie bombed at the box office. I was in high school when it came out. I went and saw it because it had, like, Chris Jericho in it, Mark Henry, The Big Show, The Great Khali, and I went and saw it. It's so funny, that's the big team-up moment, is bringing all those wrestlers together. Those are MacGruber's boys. And, and he's like, I gotta go talk to the brass. And they're chanting, fuck the brass. Fuck the brass. Fuck the brass. Fuck the brass. And then as he's walking over to him, the van blows up. He blew him up himself. And he's like, guys, are you okay? Just ridiculous. And of course he does the eulogy at the funerals, and he's like, I wish you didn't curse so much. Well, I'm fucking upset. It's just ridiculous. MacGruber is great. It's one of our modern day comedy masterpieces. If you haven't seen it, again, comedy is very subjective. It's a lot like horror. Not everybody has the same taste in comedy, but if you're into like dumb but kind of smart humor, I really think you'll love MacGruber. And the next question is from Emmanuel, and he said, favorite wrestling match? For me, it's Cena versus HBK WrestleMania 23 match on Raw, April 23rd, 2007. And I actually remember that match very well. I believe it was in Europe, and they went for about an hour. And it was better than their WrestleMania 23 match, which is funny. Their WrestleMania 23 match was never even supposed to happen. That was supposed to be a WrestleMania 22 rematch between Triple H and John Cena. But Triple H got hurt that year, tore his quad again, I believe. So, why not bring in his DX buddy to replace him? And that's how he got Shawn Michaels in that spot. And I appreciate that. Shawn Michaels is one of my all-time favorite wrestlers. And what is my favorite wrestling match? Well, but it features Shawn Michaels from 1997. 1997's Bad Blood, actually. Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels in the first Hell in a Cell match. I think this is the greatest match ever. Of course, it checks a lot of boxes for me. My favorite wrestler of all time is The Undertaker. My second favorite wrestler of all time is Shawn Michaels. And this is peak Shawn Michaels in 1997. This is drugged out Shawn Michaels. And he was just selling for everyone. And him selling and getting the shit kicked out of him by The Undertaker in that Hell in a Cell, it's just great to see. Shawn Michaels is the best seller, and then Undertaker is the best big man in wrestling history, and they are just beating the hell out of each other. Really, it's Shawn taking the beating, but The Undertaker does not end up winning that match. What makes this match also very historic is it's the debut of Kane. That's gotta be Kane! That's gotta be Kane! He costs The Undertaker the match, tombstones him, and that's the first time we ever saw Kane. I just rewatched this match at the end of last year because we're doing a chronological rewatch of WWE Raw, and all the pay-per-views that come up. Me and a couple of my friends get together and we rewatch those pay-per-views when we got together. We'll rewatch Bad Blood. Actually, I missed the Bad Blood pay-per-view, so I had to rewatch it on my own, but still, it's always worth rewatching. I remember in like 2006, I had an Undertaker DVD, and I would always rewatch the pay-per-view before that match, which was In Your House Ground Zero, and then that match. Those are two of my favorite Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels matches, even though the ones at WrestleMania 25 and WrestleMania 26 are more remembered. I just think that you had a much younger Shawn Michaels and a much younger Undertaker. They moved around a little bit better, different wrestling styles. And I think it all just came together best in the 1997 Bad Blood Hell in a Cell match, the first Hell in a Cell match. So that was a great question, Emmanuel. Thanks so much. I always love talking wrestling, so I always appreciate a question like that. And the next question's from Pop and Fresh 2928, and he said, "What movies would you like to see get the 4K treatment?" For me, 2010, the year we made contact, and The Ninth Gate. Now, 2010, I could see us getting that on 4K Blu-ray. I mean, maybe a lot of people don't remember that one. That is actually the sequel to 2001: A Space Odyssey, but it's not done by Stanley Kubrick. But it's still a very good movie, a very interesting movie, and a very good movie to look at. So I think that would actually translate well to the 4K Blu-ray format. And I've been asked this question a couple times, like, what are the movies I want to get the 4K Blu-ray treatment? I try and do a list of these every single year because, you know, every once in a while, we'll get one of those movies and we'll take it off the list. Like The Terminator was always at number one on the list, but we finally got that last year. Chinatown was always a big one for me. Major League, Once Upon a Time in the West. We've gotten all those movies on 4K Blu-ray to, you know, varying degree. It's rare when one of my favorites comes out and it gets like all the bells and whistles. Like RoboCop got the Arrow video treatment a couple years ago. Like that's all I ever want is all my favorite movies to get the Arrow video treatment. If I can get the Criterion treatment, that's great too. Sometimes they just go a little bit half-ass on it, like I'll get the Kino Lorber treatment. But it's either way or just to see it get that upgrade always makes me excited. The big ones I really want are still the Jim Carrey 1994 films like The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, and Ace Ventura. Then of course I want Boogie Nights on 4K Blu-ray and There Will Be Blood. Now these rumors have just been persistent. You know and the thing is like we talked about earlier, does that mean we'll ever get Magnolia? I don't know. I think Magnolia really has just kind of really been forgotten about, and it blows my mind because it has one of Tom Cruise's best acting performances of his entire career in there, but no one ever talks about Magnolia anymore, including myself. I always will skip over it because of Boogie Nights. I think that's the biggest thing that's working against Magnolia is that it came after Boogie Nights, and that's a really tough film to follow. Boogie Nights, you know, has more of an appeal to a lot of people, while Magnolia is very ambitious. It's trying to stuff a lot into one movie. It's got these different character arcs going on, these different storylines that we're trying to follow before they connect each other. Very Robert Altman-esque. I think it works very well. I think it gets a little too ambitious for its own good, but still, I think that's the kind of movie that deserves a 4K Blu-ray release. Will it get it? I don't know. I just want every single Paul Thomas Anderson movie on 4K Blu-ray just because they're very well made, good movies to look at. Even The Master, I would love that on 4K Blu-ray one of these days just because Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix are just giving all-out amazing performances, and that movie just deserves to be analyzed, so I would love to see that get the 4K Blu-ray treatment one day. And then obviously some Tarantino films like Django and The Hateful Eight, I would love those. Lethal Weapon's rumored for May, so hopefully we're getting that this year. That's another one that I really wanted. Day of the Dead's a big one too, like we've gotten Dawn of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead. I don't know why we haven't gotten the other one in that trilogy of movies that people absolutely love, because Day of the Dead also has a fantastic score. I could see like Arrow Video doing that, you know, Second Sight, who did Dawn of the Dead. I could see them taking up the reins and giving us Day of the Dead one of these days. I hope so, because it definitely deserves it. So that was a great question, Poppin' Fresh. I appreciate that. Thank you so much, buddy. And the next question is from There's Something Wrong. He said, do you think you could beat Prime Arnie in a cage match? The good thing about Arnold Schwarzenegger is he is very muscular. I imagine he moves pretty slow. I'm not the fastest. Obviously, I'm not the most muscular. Now, if I'm going to match up against Prime Arnold, I'm going to guess sometime in the 1970s or 1980s. I'm going to have to fight dirty if I want to take this guy on. I don't think I have a shot, but I'm going to give it a whirl. And I'm thinking if I just can like kick him in the balls and then maybe just a bunch of shots to the chest and face, maybe I could take him down. But if that doesn't faze him, there's a good chance I'm going to die in that fight. So that was a good question. I don't think I have a shot, but still, great question. And that's questions from my buddy Lorenzo Harris, man of God. And he asked me, who's your favorite Wayans brother, and what are your top 5 Wayans brothers movies of all time? And my favorite Wayans brother is Damon Wayans. Damon Wayans has been around about the same time as Keenan Ivory Wayans. Keenan Ivory would always cast him in his stuff. That's why you'll see him in I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker. And then in the 1990s, the early 1990s, he was a main player on In Living Color. You saw him like as Homie the Clown on there. Men on Film, he was great. I'll give that 2 snaps up. He was fantastic in that. Became a great movie star himself in such movies as Bulletproof and The Last Boy Scout. Then, of course, he ended up becoming a sitcom actor in the 2000s. This is why I really love him. If you guys were if you were around in the early 2000s, there was a sitcom called My Wife and Kids. I love that show. Me and my wife still watch that show on rewatch. So Damon Wayans, I just feel like he never went away, and he's just been a huge part of my life. So out of all the Wayans brothers, yes, a lot of people might pick Sean and Marlon because of the movies, and you'll see my list of movies, and they always include Sean and Marlon. But still, my favorite one is going to be Damon Wayans. Absolutely love him. His son, Damon Wayans Jr., is also really funny. But as far as my Wayans brothers list, at number 5, I had Hollywood Shuffle. Now, this technically isn't a Wayans brothers movie. Keenen Ivory Wayans co-wrote the movie, and he also has a small part in it. So I kind of want to count it just because I love Hollywood Shuffle. It's dealing with like black actors and how they get cast in movies. I just think it's Robert Townsend directed that movie, and he's great in it as well. Just watch Hollywood Shuffle. But if you don't want to count that, I will put The Last Boy Scout on this list. That's the one with him and Damon Wayans and Bruce Willis. It's a great movie, and it's directed by Tony Scott. So anytime I can talk about The Last Boy Scout and hope it gets a 4K Blu-ray release. Earlier question in the show was about movies that I don't think will ever come to 4K Blu-ray. If I'm being honest, I don't think The Last Boy Scout will ever come to 4K Blu-ray. I hope so. I mean, we got The Fan on 4K Blu-ray, which is like one of the more forgotten about Tony Scott films. So I don't know. Number 4, I got White Chicks. This is reverse blackface. I know people kind of complain about this now, but still, this movie was absolutely hysterical. This is the first movie I ever saw in theaters by myself. I remember the rest of my family went and saw something else, but I was like, I have to go see White Chicks, and it was hysterical. I think Marlon and Sean are great in this movie. I mean, just the quotes in this movie, $1 Miller. I love this movie. White Chicks is still really funny. At number 3, I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker. We talked about this a little bit earlier. This stars Keenen Ivory Wayans. This is a spoof of the blaxploitation movies. Keenen Ivory Wayans, this is what he did. He was making spoof movies, and this is what he's most known for. Obviously, he would end up with such movies that we'll talk about in a second, but I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker, like having I think it was called The Hood Games, the guy OG'd, he overdosed on gold. This is stuff that just really makes me laugh. Now, given the jokes themselves are very much of the late 1980s, so they might not hold up that well, but I still think they do. I still think this movie is really funny. And number 2, I have Scary Movie. This is a huge one as well. When I was growing up, the first 2 Scary Movies are directed by Keenen Ivory Wayans, and then they went to the Zucker brothers after that with Scary Movie 3. But the first 2 are absolutely the best. They star Sean and Marlon Wayans, directed by Keenen Ivory Wayans. They're spoof movies of, the first one is especially a spoof of Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer, with other jokes in there. Scary Movie 2 definitely takes on more movies, including The Exorcist and Poltergeist. Those are 2 big ones. They are just absolutely funny. But Scary Movie's an all-time classic. That's where I found out about Anna Faris, and the movie still holds up to this very day, including that great ending with Dewey, and they do the Usual Suspects ending. I saw that ending before I saw The Usual Suspects. So when I saw The Usual Suspects, I was like, oh shit, the ending to Scary Movie, because I'm a fucking moron. And then at number 1, I got Don't Be a Menace in South Central While Drinking Your Juice in the Hood. Perfect timing for this movie. This is probably where a lot of people were introduced to Marlon and Sean. Based on my age, I actually saw Scary Movie first, and then I rented Don't Be a Menace from Blockbuster, and I just remember laughing hysterically at it. And I've probably seen this movie like 50 times since. I mean, this is a spoof movie. It's right in the title. It's a spoof of like movies like South Central, Boys in the Hood, Menace to Society, Juice, all these movies that were coming out at this time. And if you've seen those movies, the movie itself is so funny. Just early in the movie, if you remember the beginning of Boys in the Hood, when Angela Bassett is dropping off her son Trey to Lawrence Fishburne's house, and there's like leaves falling out. You don't really think too much about it, but I guess, Keenen Ivory Wayans was when he was writing the movie, and there's like hundreds of leaves just falling down. They don't stop falling when it's Marlon Wayans in the car with his mom. It's just so many great jokes in Don't Be a Menace in South Central, so definitely see that if you haven't seen it. A great Bernie Mac performance. I hate black pepper. I hate Whoopi Goldberg's lips. Like, he's just great as one little scene as well. It's a fantastic film. A great spoof movie. One of the best spoof movies of all time. I can highly recommend that. Great question, Lorenzo. I really appreciate that, buddy. Next question's from Movie Dude 1989, and he said, can you do a Beavis and Butthead impression? I grew up with Beavis and Butthead, so of course we did Beavis and Butthead impressions. I don't know how good it's going to be, but I'll go for it. Beavis. Yes, Butthead. I need tippy for my bunghole. I don't know if that was good or not, but hey, fuck it, I'll try it. And the next question is from Ryan Hill. He said, how many times do you think you can get a new one for the same price? And he's talking about rebuying the same movie over and over and, justifying it to yourself. Like me, I own about 4 different copies of Terminator 2. I love Terminator 2, but do I need to own 4 copies of the movie? Absolutely not. It just comes down to how you feel about the film. Like my favorite films, I don't mind double dipping or triple dipping. Of course, it has to be a new scan. That's really where I draw the line. Like Pulp Fiction, one of my favorite movies of all time. It's actually my second favorite film ever. But I will not buy that 30th anniversary 4K Blu-ray that came out at the end of last year. Why? Because it's the exact same scan that I already have the 4K Blu-ray of. I mean, I appreciate them going all out for the collectors, but if I'm not getting anything new with the disc, for me, I can't justify buying it. Now, I have made that exception in the past with Terminator 2 at 4K Blu-ray, and I don't even watch the Terminator 2 4K Blu-ray, but when they came out, that Lionsgate Steelbook, I'll admit it got the better of me, and I had to grab that. But I'm trying not to do things like that, like the Apocalypse Now 4K Steelbook. It's the exact same release that they have done in the past. It's just now in a steelbook, so there's no reason for me to go out of my way and buy it. So it really depends, but for the most part, if I have the same scan and I think that's the best scan, I will not double dip. Now there are certain scenarios like Heat or Planes, Trains, and Automobiles where I feel like the Blu-ray is better than the 4K Blu-ray, so I just own them both. But those are the only real times that I make an exception. But for the most part, I just want to have one version of the film. I don't need to buy all the different steelbook releases. Like, I like art and I like the box art, but I just cannot justify spending all that extra money if I don't really have an expendable income. So that's a great question, Ryan. Appreciate that as well. And this is a fun question from our buddy 0210M6. And he said, if you had the power to create your own 4K Blu-ray of any movie of your choice, what would make the perfect 4K Blu-ray? For example, would you have any AI, keep or take off grain, Dolby Vision or HDR10, Dolby Sound or HDTs, extras or no extras, steelbook or digibook, slipcover, etc.? Basically, list off the things you would do if you could create your own dream perfect 4K Blu-ray. Well, if I'm picking the film, let's just use Terminator as an example. If I could have the perfect version of that and take anything I want, I'm taking the Arrow Video hard case, and I'm going to take the Arrow Video hard case that they did with True Romance and put a steelbook inside of that. Not the steelbook that came out last year. I want a new steelbook. I want a new black steelbook that looks like the original movie poster on that. Throw that in there with the Arrow Video hard casing. Now, it doesn't have to be Arrow Video, but I like that way that they do that with the reading material inside and the poster. Do all that. Even though I have no room for the posters, I really appreciate that. So that's giving something to the fans. I want HDR10 and Dolby Vision. I do not want AI being used on this. I'm not a big fan of AI, given I've seen some good use of it, but I'm a stickler about using AI. I'm not a big fan of this being out in the world right now. I really, truly do believe that this will lead to our demise. I mean, the Terminator warned of this, but yet the guy who created the Terminator uses AI, so real contradiction there. But, if we could stay away from AI, I know it's inevitable, and I'm not one of those people like, we can't go back, so it's here to stay. But I do not want that touching my 4K Blu-ray. I, of course, want some fill grain. Now, you can clean it up. I don't want it to look like it's snowing outside. You can clean it up, but you always keep the film grain if it was there. Something that's shot on digital, I'm not one of those people that needs it to have, like, artificial film grain on there. If the film grain was present, you can clean it up, do that. But, I'm not a stickler for something like that. As long as I want it to look the best it could possibly look, but I also don't want DNR use. So, if you use it a little bit, I can understand that. You want to clean up the image a little bit, I get that, but don't make that waxy look that everybody hates. I hate that as well. And then, of course, you know how I am when it comes to extras. I want as many extras as possible. If you can give me some new extras, that would be great. Some new interviews with Arnold, James Cameron, give me a new making of documentary, a new looking back documentary, all the stuff that I would kill, all the bells and whistles. I'm not a big audio commentary track fan. I only really use that as a tool when I need it. But for the most part, I'm not going to spend my free time listening to commentary tracks, so you can leave that off. Other people might like that, but, this is my disc, and I don't really need that on there. And then, of course, as far as the audio goes, they really gave us the best version of audio ever on that Terminator 4K Blu-ray, giving us a brand new Dolby Atmos track, which is really good, and then giving us the old original audio with the old sound effects. I mean, they already nailed it when it comes to that, so throw that on there as well. But I always want, like, a nice new Dolby Atmos track, but I just like something that's mixed well. As long as it's mixed well, I don't mind. Like, there's a great DTS HD 5.1 on the Days of Thunder 4K Blu-ray. Just check that out. And that's what you can do with a DTS HD 5.1. Like, people hear Blu-ray and they think, oh, it's lesser than 4K. There's some 4K Blu-rays that are not as good as certain Blu-rays, and same thing with audio tracks. Like, there's some audio tracks that are DTS HDs out there that, people kind of just blow off, but they are really well done too. So, it just really depends on who's doing the mixing, who's putting the effort in. Look at those Dolby Atmos tracks released by Disney. I just watched, like, Black Panther the other night with my wife again, and that Atmos track is so fucking weak. It blows my mind. Like, why is that even on there if you're not even going to do anything with it? I actually forgot I bought that 4K, and then I put it in, and I was like, oh, that's why, because it's not great, and it really does bother me, but that's Disney for you. Disney will have no part of my 4K Blu-ray release. That was a great question, buddy. I appreciate that. Thank you for that. It was very thoughtful. And the next question is from DeathStalker83. He said, not sure if anyone has asked this question yet, but what are your top 10 favorite Bruce Willis movies? Personally, I like the movies Red 1 and Red 2. So, Bruce Willis. Bruce Willis is one of our great actors. He arrived on the scene in the mid-1980s. He was a sitcom actor. Then obviously he blew up with Die Hard, and he's experiencing a lot of medical problems right now with dementia, and we'll probably never see him act again. Let's just hope he gets to live out a good rest of his life. But he did leave a lot of films behind for us to check out, and you're not going to see Red 1 or Red 2 on my list. Now, those are very good movies, and it was hard for me to make a list of the top 10. And I have a couple honorable mentions, including Red 1 and Red 2, but I also want to point out his cameo in Ocean's 12. That was a lot of fun. But at number 10, and I might lose some of you guys here, but just remember when I was born, I have Look Who's Talking 1 and Look Who's Talking 2 on here. Like, I heard the voice of Mikey from a very, very, very young age. Like, it's implanted in my mind. So I hear Bruce Willis all the time, just from watching these movies. Given there's a third movie, Look Who's Talking Now, which I also do like. It's kind of a Christmas movie. He's not the voice of Mikey in that anymore, the kid from Seventh Heaven. The kid from the first two movies grew up to be the kid from Seventh Heaven, and they just let him do the voice work in there. But the first one, we were just talking about Damon Wayans. Damon Wayans voiced a character in Look Who's Talking 2 before they did The Last Boy Scout, so nice little tie in there, but I have to include these movies, like they're a big part of my childhood. Number 9, Nobody's Fooled. He's not the star of this movie, but he is the co-star in it along with Paul Newman. It's really Paul Newman's movie. Philip Seymour Hoffman pops up in this one as well. There's a review of the Kino Lorber 4K Blu-ray here on the channel. It's just a good movie that came out in 1994. You know, not a 10 out of 10 or anything, but still a very good movie. At number 8, I have Looper. This is probably the last great film that Bruce Willis did. It stars him and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. They play the same character. Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays the younger version, and Bruce Willis plays the older version. This one's directed by Rian Johnson. A fantastic time travel sci-fi movie. I can highly recommend you guys check this one out. Also, you'll notice the prosthetics that Joseph Gordon-Levitt's chin is made to look like Bruce Willis's chin. Nice little attention to detail here there. At number 7, I got Armageddon. Not the world's biggest Michael Bay fan, but I really enjoy Armageddon. It's a great popcorn flick. Just like a lot of Michael Bay movies. You don't take that one too seriously, but it's a hell of a good time. At number 6, The Fifth Element. You know, this is just a great one. A very entertaining 1997 sci-fi movie. And, you know, Bruce Willis is kind of bringing the charm with this one. You know, Mila Jovovich kind of speaks her own language throughout the whole film. So Bruce Willis doing a lot of the heavy work here. And I really enjoy it. I think it's a really fun one. It's got 2 4K Blu-ray releases. Make sure you get that Second Sight one. Is it Second Sight? No, Studio Canal. Studio Canal. At number 5, I have The Sixth Sense. Now, I like The Sixth Sense more than the other M. Night Shyamalan movie we have on this list, but I do think his performance in the other movie is just slightly better, but he has a great arc in this movie. Obviously, if you see The Sixth Sense, you know how this ends up. I'm not going to be the one to spoil that here for you guys. Had it spoiled for me. At number 4, I have 12 Monkeys. I don't know how many people still talk about 12 Monkeys, but I love 12 Monkeys. Terry Gilliam directed this one. It's a great time travel movie. A great time travel movie you should watch in the winter, actually. It takes place in Philadelphia, I believe. It's snowing out for most of this movie, and, you know, it's also got that dirty, gritty look on it. Terry Gilliam knows how to, like, when he shoots his movies, he likes to do, like, these extreme close-ups, but it's also very, like, gross. Like, there's a scene where, like, drool pouring out of his mouth, and I'm just like, ugh. But that's what Terry Gilliam does. In all of his movies, they kind of have these little bit of, like, gross-out things in there, and there's plenty of that in this movie. Number 3, Unbreakable, the other M. Night Shyamalan movie. And this is one of the greatest superhero films of all time. A lot of people might not even realize that this is even a superhero film, but it is about a real guy if he became a superhero, or he didn't even realize he had powers. This guy, he can't be killed. And just like all good superheroes, he's also got his own kryptonite. In this case, it happens to be water, which pays off in the absolute worst way possible in the movie Glass, but that takes nothing away from the movie Unbreakable. And then at number 2, I got Pulp Fiction. You know, obviously, he's one part in this huge ensemble cast. He has one of the best parts in the film when we go to him. You know, we transition from the great Christopher Walken monologue to Butch and everything he has to go through with Zed and his girlfriend. His girlfriend is horrible in the movie as far as an actress goes, but he's fantastic. And then at number 1, come on, Die Hard. John McClane will always be what Bruce Willis is most remembered for. Die Hard 2 is fine. Die Hard with a Vengeance is great. But the original Die Hard, it's a Christmas classic. It's an action movie classic. And it's one of the best movies ever made. So that was a great question. I really do appreciate that. Love talking some Bruce Willis. Next question's from Aces of Movies. And they said, most funny movie of 1989. So I have my choice right here. 1989 was a very funny year for comedies. You know, as also the year we had Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which is great. Uncle Buck came out in 1989. I love Uncle Buck as well. But for me, I got Major League. It has to be Major League. Major League is one of my, actually, it is my favorite baseball movie of all time. I go really back and forth with that in A League of Their Own. This one is much more of a straightforward comedy, but it does hit those sports movie beats. But it's just absolutely hysterical. I quote this movie still all the time to this very day. Same year as Look Who's Talking as well. So 1989, I see why you picked it. It's a great year for comedy, but I have to go with Major League. It's a stone cold classic. And the next question is from Tom Cruise's burner account, and he said, if Arrow Video offered a subscription service similar to what Vinegar Syndrome does for $1,000 a year, would you consider subscribing? And, you know, this is funny. I've always thought about this because Vinegar Syndrome does this, and I've never signed up for it just because I don't think Vinegar Syndrome has the greatest lineup of films. Now, the disc is always great there. The packaging is always great. They always go all out for their releases, but the films themselves aren't something that always appeals to me. So there's never really a reason for me to sign up for that. Now, Arrow Video, who I buy a lot of their releases from and have spent a lot of money just on their actual website, if they actually did something like that, would I pay like $1,000 a year? I mean, I would have to know a little bit more about what those releases are, like, because if it's random and then the year ends up being bad, I don't know. Like, if there's more perks to it, I have to see what the perks are. But yeah, I would definitely consider it just because it's Arrow Video, and I really do think they have some of the best releases out there, and they always concentrate, just like Vinegar Syndrome, on the packaging. You don't really have too many issues ever with their packaging. In fact, I can even like on a bad release like Weird Science, they still have an amazing slipcover on there. So Arrow Video, for the most part, they don't really miss, but some of the movies, like maybe I won't want them, will I be disappointed? But I'd still definitely be into that. That's a great question, Tom Cruise's burner account. Thank you so much, buddy. And this is a really cool question from Mozart's Ghost, and he said, if you could start entirely fresh with movies, would you go back and watch them chronologically? I would start with silent films, then work up to present day. It would take a long time, but that seems like the most logical way to digest everything. I feel like creativity of each generation's most talented directors and actors can get lost by jumping around in cinema history. When I go back and watch a classic film now, a lot of it can resonate, but certain aspects that were novel or even groundbreaking back then can seem like a tired trope or cliche. If you have already been exposed to those concepts, most modern films are derivative or at least partially inspired from the work of that preceded it, though. It's really hard to be original. I guess that's what the advantage you had back then. Maybe it's harder to do now more than ever. This is really long-winded, so I don't expect you to put it all in the show, but I hope you would like to think about it. I told you I was going to put the whole thing on the show because that was a great question. You put so much effort into it. Of course, I have to talk about that on the show, and it's a great question because, you know, when I do this channel especially, I have to bounce around all the time just because of when movies come out that I have to review. And if, like, you know, a certain week, like a classic film might come to 4K Blu-ray, while a more modern film might come to 4K Blu-ray. So I might end up watching a movie that came out in the 1920s on the same week I watch a movie that came out in 2025. In a couple weeks, The Third Man, which came out in the 1940s, is going to be coming out on 4K Blu-ray. And that's going to be coming out on the same day as, I believe, Panic Room is coming out. I believe it's February 18th, or if it's February 25th, it's the same day as, like, Amadeus or Pacino and Cruising, so 1980s films. But, like, you know, you can go from watching a movie like The Third Man and then watch a movie like Cruising, which are very, very different films. And unfortunately, that's one side effect of this channel because I agree with you. If I could go back, I would like to start in, like, the silent film era and move along chronologically, because when you do go back, one thing you'll always notice are those tropes and cliches, and you have to, like, stop and think for a second and be like, well, the cliche came from this movie, so of course you kind of, like, you might sit there and go, oh, that's so fucking cheesy, but this is the first time that they ever used that cheese was in this movie, so you kind of have to, like, take a step back. You can look at it, if you watch any film fan out there, as the more movies you watch, the more tropes you notice, the more cliches you notice, you'll start rolling your eyes more, and that's one big thing about when you start to watch more movies. That's why you'll like to watch more challenging films, watch more foreign films, because you start to get bored of those cliches. Like, when you go to the movies all the time, especially nowadays, there's so much generic crap in theaters that it's tough to get interested in, and you're, like, bored most of the time because you're like, I've seen this movie 4 or 5 times already. But if you go back to, like, the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1940s, you'll see where all these tropes were invented, where all these cliches came to be. And I do agree with you. I also believe that because films today, you know, rely so much on technology and CGI, that they did lose a lot of that creativity, because a lot of it's being done for them through a computer, where back then, you really had to make good use of your talents. Like, if you were a good director, you knew the best way to get the most out of your actors, the most out of your production. The sets themselves meant a lot back in the day, and today they really don't, and it really bothers me. Like, I'm a huge 1980s fan, and they were doing stuff back then with effects that a lot of people might be like, that stuff doesn't hold up, but when you watch it nowadays, you could also appreciate what they had to do to make those effects come to life. That's why it kind of bothers me a little bit, like George Lucas had to go back in there and CGI stuff in the original Star Wars trilogy. It's like, this is the early days of Industrial Light and Magic. Be proud of what you did. Be proud of that original trilogy and how you had to use the technology that was only available to you then. I understand that it didn't really match up to your vision, but be proud of that because it's incredible. And when I go back and watch a movie from the 1970s, it never takes me out of it to like see these things on film. Like, I'm actually like, oh wow, they had to do that. I completely understand it. I try and really put myself in those eras when I watch a movie and try not to think about like the fact, like sometimes, it's the dialogue comes in just absolutely atrocious, or the score itself is like super cheesy, but I try to remember, hey, it's of the time. Now, I would love to go back if possible and just, start from the beginning. But, of course, time machines don't exist. I know they don't exist because I assume if they did, somebody would have came and told me by now that, hey, I'm traveling back in time. And I'm not seeing a lot of that around here. But I definitely wish I could have started, like, back then. It was a lot tougher for me. Like, I really love film, so I love going back. And, like, I kind of consider myself a little bit of a film historian because I do love going back and watching classic films and watching old directors and seeing what they had to work with back in the 1930s. It's just something I absolutely love doing, so I don't mind necessarily going back. But it does get a little tough when you bounce around between modern films and older films and films from certain eras. Certain directors are a little bit tougher to watch than other directors. Some directors were just really working within the studio system, and those films are so cliche and so tough to watch nowadays. And I'm sure back in the day, like, that movie was considered very modern and ahead of its time, and it can get a little bit tough watching it now, but still, we can't go back in time, so it is what it is. But if I could, buddy, I would go back and start with the solid era and just keep moving along. Like, imagine being a person who was growing up in, like, the 1950s, and then the 1960s rolled around, the 1970s rolled around. Like, you were alive in the 1950s, but then in the 1970s, you're, like, in your early 20s. Like, imagine walking into a movie theater and seeing, like, The French Connection or Alien for the first time, or obviously everyone knows about The Exorcist and Jaws, but imagine seeing those movies for the first time. Like in the summer of 1982, like you went to the theaters in June and you got to see The Thing, Blade Runner, E.T., and Poltergeist, and The Wrath of Khan all in the same month. Like, I could die a happy man. Like, I can only imagine what that was like back then. Did you know, like, you were seeing something special? Like, that's one thing I always wonder. Like, that's one thing, like, nowadays, like, do you go to the theater and know that you saw something special? Like, I only know a couple times. They're both Christopher Nolan movies. Like, I knew The Dark Knight was special when I saw it in theaters. Avengers Endgame, I knew that was special. And then Oppenheimer last year. Like, I knew I was in the theater seeing something special that is going to stand the test of time. But did people know that about Blade Runner? Because it failed. Like, The Thing failed in theaters. Like, did people know, like, this is special? Like, everyone talks about Star Wars, but, like, other movies. I've always been very curious about that. So when people, like, comment and, like, oh, I was an extra in this movie, or I remember going to the theater and seeing this. Like, that's stuff that just really fascinates me. I love hearing those stories. So keep leaving those stories in the comment section because I do truly love that. And that was a great question, Mozart's Ghost. Thank you so much, buddy. I really appreciate that. And this is going to be our last question of the week, and it's from Rico Gomez. And he said, name any movie you give a 10 to, the masterpiece. And then he goes so on and so forth with 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. And then 1 being the absolute worst. And now, 10s I only reserve for, like, absolute masterpieces. And at this point today, I just watched The Godfather 1 and 2 yesterday. I did my yearly watch through of those two films, but for the first time in my entire life, I was able to actually sit down and watch The Godfather Part 1 and Part 2 back to back. And those movies are absolute masterpieces. Those get the 10s. They deserve those 10s. They earn those 10s. I mean, if you look at it as just one film, it's just one of the greatest films ever made. It is probably the greatest film ever made. It's unbelievable what Francis Ford Coppola and everybody were able to do with that movie. My favorite movie of all time, The Terminator. I said that's not a 10, but it's a 10 in my heart, so we'll say that's a 10. And like Pulp Fiction, I just reviewed a 9 here on the channel not too long ago. Kneecap, I'd give that a 9 out of 10. A movie like Heat and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, I have those as 9s as well. They get close. Like Heat, I might give a 9.5, but in this category, now as far as 8s goes, I would say 7 and 8s is what most movies are. Like when you go to the theaters, most movies are a 7 and 8. They're just good movies. You enjoy them. You might not necessarily think about them. Maybe you rewatch them. I got movies like a couple Arnold movies like Total Recall, The Running Man. Like those movies are 8 out of 10s. Kindergarten Cop, that's an 8 out of 10. When you get to the 7s, you get a couple of sequels that are pretty good. You know, Anchorman 2, 22 Jump Street, Halloween Kills. Like those are 7 out of 10s, but they do have flaws. Like Halloween Kills, I love watching Michael do his thing, but then Evil Dies Tonight, you know, that really drags down the movie. At 6, you know, you get movies like The Bone Collector or Transformers where you're like, that's alright, but there are some flaws in those movies. Now, 5, I kind of reserve for movies that I think are so bad they're good. Like, for example, The Toxic Avenger or The Room. Like, Tommy Wiseau's The Room. Like, that movie is stupid of all. Like, that movie's hard to believe that movie was actually made. They had to make a movie about that movie being made called A Disaster Artist because it's hard to believe that movie even exists. But when you watch the movie, it's so entertaining. It's so bad. It's good. Same thing with The Toxic Avenger. That's my favorite B movie of all time. But, I mean, the effects, they change actors. Can you give it like a 9 out of 10? No, you gotta give it like a 5. Number 4, this is like where you put like the 50 Shades of Grey movies because people love those movies. I watch them, I'm like, wow, can't believe this movie got made. And number 3, you know, this is where you kind of put like the Disney sequels that used to come out in the 1990s, like straight to VHS, like The Lion King 2 or Pocahontas 2. What's there, I don't remember. I just know that they just pushed these out and like every parent would buy them for their kids and they're like, these movies are dog shit. As far as 2s go, Halloween Ends. I guess there's some good kills in that movie, but overall, unredeemable. And then a 1 would be a movie like Morbius, which is just fucking horrible. And, you know, if you were go to the reason why it's not even a 0 is because, like I've said in the past, the opening credits get it at least to a 1. Still a very, very, very bad movie, in my opinion. And that was a great question, Rico. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate everybody who sent in questions for this week's show. I had 34 questions, I believe, over the last 2 weeks. So obviously we didn't get to answer all of those questions this week. And please don't feel bad, guys. I just don't have enough time to answer them all every single week. So we have to roll some over into next week's show. If I have missed it in the last 2 weeks, though, definitely make sure you re-tag me in there because I probably missed it. And it probably deleted the picture or something. So tag me if I missed your question from like over 2 weeks ago. And if I didn't answer your question this week, I'll definitely make sure I answer it in next week's show. And please keep leaving questions, guys. We can never have enough questions. I'll get to them eventually. Leave those in the comment section below. And next week we'll start with the best question of the week. This week, if I had to like give an example of like what I thought were the best questions, 0201 M6 and Mozart's Ghost, like those are just great, well thought out questions. But seriously, guys, don't feel bad. I really appreciate every single one of those questions. The last thing I ever want to do is make anyone feel bad about themselves. I do not want to do that. Like, I will not do the question of the week if anyone's going to feel like shit because that's the last thing I want to do. I want you to come to this show. I want you to come to this channel, and I want you to like forget about the world and just, you know, enjoy yourself for a little bit of time. That's my ultimate goal here on Let's Talk. And I hope you guys enjoyed the show. And if you did, don't forget to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, share this video if you could. We also have channel memberships, so if you want to become a friend of the channel, a producer for the channel like John Doe Juggler, or a channel director like Frank from Frank's Medium Reviews, you can look for all that information in the description below. But if you got no money to throw away, guys, don't worry about it at all. We just hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, get out in those streets, tell your friends about us, and then we'll be seeing you around.